Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I call this meeting of the Audit Committee on December 3, 2018 to order. Welcome to those in the audience and those watching at home or online. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the meeting of September 24th, 2018. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Kylie, seconded by Sale. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is reports and updates. Item 3A is an update on the external audit of the city's 2018 financial statement by Keith Severson, partner, Eide Bailey. Welcome, Keith.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. As was noted, my name's Keith Severson, and I'm a partner at Eide Bailey. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon and just kind of give you an update really on the audit approach for the external audit as performed by Eide Bailey. Eide Bailey's been engaged for the 2018 financial statement audit. And I'll go through a quick PowerPoint. I believe you all have the slides there. But we just want to talk about, again, an update on our service team, some of the objectives that we go through when we're doing the audit, our approach. I want to give you a little update on some professional standards and then our potential risk assessment. So really just bringing you up to date of where we have been this past year and what we're going to look at over the winter. Consistent with last year, our service team is going to remain the same. My partner, Brian Stavanger, is the engagement partner, and Brian's been the engagement partner for many years on the audit for Eide Bailey here in Sioux Falls, and he operates out of our Fargo office, and unfortunately, he would be here today, but had a family commitment, wasn't able to get down here or be online. So I'll just sit in for him. And myself, my role as communication partner is really to bridge the gap. Anytime Brian's not there, to reach out to the internal audit committee, the city, and really be a communication coordinator between our audit team and the city finance in this group as well. The other staff will remain the same. Courtney Richmond was our manager on the project last year. She will also be on the project this year, and she'll head up the team along with our staff here in Sioux Falls and Fargo. So we kind of team it up out of both. Throughout the year, we do provide consultation to the management on various matters that may come up, including potentially the transition, as we had this past year with the internal audit manager, as well as providing some training to the city staff. Our team provided some training last summer in a forensic manner, just to assist and really to provide some console and training throughout the year. And so we also then work with city staff to address any new pronouncements or how you're going to approach those, what impact they may have as it relates to the financial statement. So throughout the year, our team is pretty well in touch with the city finance department. I'll welcome any questions along the way, but our initial objectives, as you know, really is to perform the audit of the financial statements in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, and the Code of Federal Regulations. And these are specific items that we need to go through as it relates to looking at the financial statements in the whole. And we do work and go through those procedures to obtain a reasonable but not an absolute assurance about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. In general, they do fairly represent the financial position of the city as of 12/31, the year that we are auditing. Audit procedures will include various tests on a test basis, not looking at every transaction, but we do go through and look at various procedures and various invoices and really everything on a test basis and the evidence that would support those amounts in the appropriate disclosures. We do have obviously many discussions with management, and most importantly, We also assess the quality of the accounting principles, really the policies that are being used to prepare those financial statements, and to discuss significant estimates, which include, as you note there, the IBNR, which is the insurance accrual at the end of the year, OPB, which is the other post-employment benefits from some of our older pension plans, the sanitary landfill and some of those post-closure costs, as well as pension assets and liabilities. So we do obtain schedules and review the actuarial calculations on many of those items, but those are all part of our audit approach. Our planning is really to get started in the fall. Even though we have communication throughout the year, our planning has actually begun in November and December. We meet with the finance office to discuss various entity changes, the general environment, internal control changes, anything that may be impacting our year-end analysis, the internal audit, what's been going on at the internal audit. We review some of the reports that have been issued there. We obviously make fraud inquiries regarding what's going on with the city, as well as addressing new accounting changes. The interim procedures will begin, and they're actually scheduled. We had a meeting back in November regarding the implementation of one of the new Gatsbys on leases. I'll get into that in a minute here, but that started in November. But in December, we're scheduled to be out in the field with the city staff on December 17th. We did this last year, and it's significantly helped us get some of that work done and get a lot of that stuff done before the field work is really started in January and February. We do that interim testing to confirm various items, as well as review the internal control, new and significant transactions, and then obviously do and review a lot of our testing of the grants with some of the federal obligations. This year, one of the things we'll be doing in mid-December is also actual testing of physical inventory. So our team will be out and actually be counting inventory in various departments. We've selected 3 of those to look at your inventory balances and procedures as it relates to the fiduciary responsibility of managing those assets. So we'll be out doing our test counts in the field pretty much in December. The year-end testing is scheduled for the weeks of January 28th and February 25th. Those are on our calendar. We do address this for our risk-based approach. We test all the account balances and any unique transactions, and obviously we review and test estimates and the assumptions, and actually review the financial statements in their entirety. We intend to have an issue of the report on or before March 30th, which is important to try to get that as soon as we can. But our goal here is to have that back to the city on March 30th. The financial statements themselves are actually drafted by City Finance, and so they provide us a copy of the report. Then it's our responsibility to review that and then provide our opinion on top of that. But the actual hard document is prepared by the City Finance office. But the intent would have that back to this group by March 30th, with potential presentation of this committee in April to get final approval. We do consult with management and have kind of looked at various timelines, and just some notes. We've moved a couple of our weeks from the prior year just to address the capital asset information. There's a lot of detailed depreciation schedules and all of that. So we did push that back a little bit because that's a lot of information that's needed to be prepared by staff so we can get that in a timely basis. We also continue to work with and visit with the people over at Metro Communications, as well as the Housing Authority, to deal with those audits, to make sure that those items are getting completed on a timely basis for input and inclusion in the city audit as well. Then we get the actuarial information, which typically comes first couple weeks of March. And so that's some of the items that we're waiting, that's pushing that timeline a little bit down the road. But we do believe that by moving a couple of the dates with our January and February timeline, that the March 30th date will be met. A couple new professional standards that we'll be addressing this year. Gatsby 75 talks about some post-retirement benefits, just some slight modifications to the report and some of the disclosure that's required. Gatsby 85 provides clarification on several accounting issues that included evaluation on component units, goodwill, fair value measurements, and post-retirement benefits, as well as Gatsby 86, the certain debt extinguishment issues, which really is just some footnote disclosure and what we need included in the financial statements. And then Gatsby 87, which is one of the larger ones, is the new reporting standard on leases. And that was a meeting we did have with the City Finance Department back in November regarding how to report those leases. And in effect, in the future, any particular lease that is an operating lease in years past was normally just treated as a period cost. And in the future, that will need to be capitalized. And actually, any leases longer than 12 months have to be recorded as an asset and then an obligation. So things are starting to get grossed up as it relates to those obligations on those leases. So just working through those additional procedures. Then we just go through our risk assessment, and that's really our responsibility. And we have two different risks as we evaluate those: the susceptibility of an assertion to a misstatement due to an error or fraud that could be material to the financial statements before the consideration of internal controls. And this is just an inherent risk. What risks are out there as it relates to the internal controls and the evaluation of the financial statements. And then a fraud risk as we evaluate the chance of an intentional misuse or misrepresentation, and what, again, are steps taken by the city to preclude those from occurring. We then go through each of the classifications for all of the financial statement, which include cash, revenues, expenses, payroll, and inventories, and just evaluate what areas have low, moderate, or high risk, and then extend our procedures to address those particular areas. Where you see inventories where there may be a low risk, it's still important to address those factors in the field and to provide assurance that steps are being taken to test those throughout periodically. 1 year we'll test inventory, next year we may do something else. So just trying to address those variety of steps. And then we do look at the capital assets, long-term debt, fund balance, address many of the grants as it relates to all the regulatory requirements. This takes where we are making sure that those grants are spent on expenditures that are appropriate in that particular grant requirement. Then journal entries as they're made throughout the financial statements. So that's just a real quick overview as it relates to our steps and our planned timing in the audit, and just then would open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Dean.
Keith, it may be a little bit early, but do you know which major federal programs you'll be auditing for purposes of a single audit?
I don't have that, Dean, not at this time. No.
Anything else? Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Regarding the leases in Gatsby number 87, that was any lease longer than 12 months?
Yes.
Okay, so an ongoing lease that is historically, it's 12 months, but historically granted year after year after year would not apply in that situation. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Keith, I've got a few questions. First of all, and this is more for the public's information, just some overviews. So we had a negotiational thing going on with your contract, I believe end of last year. So we are with your company for this for how long did that go for?
Yes, the 2017, 3-year. We're in the second year of a 3-year bid proposal.
And then before that, I think you've been auditing the city since 2011. Am I correct in that?
A little longer than that as well. Yeah.
Oh, it went back. Okay.
Yes.
I thought 2011 was. What do you think it was? 2007? Any idea?
I don't recall the exact dates.
And just to, and I brought this up in the past before I was on this committee, but just for the public's knowledge about what some of these audits are that we do. You're doing a financial statement audit, and that's the right for our city.
That is correct.
And I want you just to do a brief explanation for people listening of what the difference between a financial statement audit would be compared to a forensic audit, compared to a performance audit.
The financial statement audit is, as I just outlined, really in accordance with the requirements for generally accepted auditing standards and looking at the financial statements taken as a whole. So it's looking at the financial statements themselves to ensure that those financial statements present the financial position of the city at a specific date. So that's just the financial audit. A forensic audit would be one that is specifically, let's just say, target into a particular department, and you look at a defined timeline of saying 1 month, and you look at each and every transaction that occurred during that specific time. So if there was a particular department or an account, we would look at each and every transaction to identify any variances, and that would be deemed a forensic. The third was a performance audit. A performance audit would be specifically agreed upon procedure that we can be engaged upon to do as it relates to a performance of, again, I'll pick on a department or a grant or some specific set of financial statements that had to meet appropriate guidelines, whether it be the busing, the transit, you know, what are the performance if it was to meet specific guidelines. We would then review the actual results of the performance of that particular department and then compare that with the intended results.
Does your company do all three of those?
Yes, we do.
And then back to like municipalities across the state, was what we're doing in Sioux Falls with this financial statement audit the mandate of every municipality? Is that how they all handle it?
Yes.
So that's the basic audit that you would do?
Well, it's a requirement in a lot of our bonding, the city bonding and financials, but that is a requirement.
Okay, and then how often do you know of other municipalities across the state that would go into these other two, like performance or forensic? Do you ever?
I'm not familiar with what their requirements are. South Dakota Department of Legislative Audit does many of the smaller cities in the state, but the other forensic and the performance audits, I'm not familiar with their requirements on those.
And my sense of things would be that for the most part, your audits probably aren't turning up big red flags across the board. Or do, I mean, and I have a friend, actually, she works in a school district in the northern part of our state, and Eide Bailey does their audit for their school. So you're doing lots of different kinds of audits, but specifically municipality audits, how often do you find discrepancies and problems?
There's a broad definition of problems, and there are instances where there may be a disclosure item that we would bring to the attention of the finance, but typically a major issue is not prevalent.
And just in closing, as we've grown so large, since even you're probably affiliation with us as our auditor, is there anything that you could suggest that we may be needing to do just to ensure that everything is as it should be? That I would think what we are required to do is going to be a little different than like a town like Hecla, South Dakota with 300 people.
Commissioner, I would just say stay in tune and stay in touch. That's really the responsibility of the auditor, and we'll present our findings and recommendations upon the conclusion of that audit. I have to go back and look at what our comments were last year. But if we do have, throughout each audit, we will come in and provide this committee and the city finance with recommendations for improvement, and that's part of our conclusions. And those were presented last April.
Thank you, Keith.
Any other questions? I do have a few. As far as Councilor Staley was talking about, in terms of performance audits, is that something that an internal audit function would be typically doing, or is that, or what you would do with performance audit different than what, let's say, our internal audit division would do?
They both can be, either party can perform those. We typically see in those entities or those governments that do have internal audits, that's part of their process. So they can be performed by both.
Okay. And then, does anybody ever ask for a forensic audit unless they have a, I mean, the typical example I would see on, in the media would be something like $75,000 is missing, and so you bring in a forensic auditor to figure out where it went, as an example.
Yeah, the cost of a forensic audit is much more, little higher cost when you approach a forensic audit because it does take additional time and more zeroing in on the particular incident. But typically a forensic audit is based off of something not being appropriate. And so something rises to an occasion that would raise caution that would require the implementation of a forensic audit.
Okay.
So it's typically not just say, well, let's do one. What's the issue behind it? Why would we want to do that to bring value to the end product?
Okay. And then regarding your risk assessment, there's 2 slides there that shows low and moderate. Are those examples, or is that an actual assessment of the city?
That is our current assessment at this time.
It is? Okay.
It is, yep.
And when would that have been done for this cycle, or was that, last year's?
That's part of our planning. Each year, we go through a planning stage to address the current assessment of risk. Based on our past performance and our current understanding, this is the assessment that we're implementing right now.
And this would help to drive the areas that you might sample and look at?
Yes, this drives our actual audit approach and where our team will spend most of their time.
Okay. And year to year, do you try to jump around different divisions, things like that? We have multiple departments and enterprises. Does that go into it? Or?
Year to year, we will modify. We try not to be, we're consistent in large areas, high risk areas, but we will definitely evaluate and look at other areas on a rotating basis. So we're not gonna, they're random testing or selective, but we will move around and look at different departments from one year to the next.
Okay, and I just want to say that I did attend one of the fraud trainings that Ide Bailey did put on. I was invited into one of those, and that your forensic specialist put on, and it was fabulous, and I learned a lot, and I could tell that the city team was incredibly happy with it as well. So it was very beneficial, and it was a nice, I guess, part of the deal, that we get.
I appreciate hearing that, Mr. Chairman. That's great.
It's very good.
Appreciate the opportunity to perform that. And I think it was timely and well received, so I appreciate that.
Very good. Any other questions?
Yes,
Councilor Staley, yes.
Well, and I guess I'd like that opportunity opened up to all of us, because I'd like to attend that fraud informational thing as well. I'd love to see that. And the other thing, piggybacking off of what Councilor Neisert said about asking when you would have a trigger for an audit, I think a big piece of that would be that fraud hotline within our city. Because I mean, I'm thinking back on that fairgrounds thing with Kathy Gorley several years ago, that probably, you were doing the same kind of audit there, but it was people saying, wow, something isn't quite right, reporting back. We've got eyes and ears all over our city. So I think that would be a great help. And I don't know, Councilor Neisert, was Ide Bailey going to be included in that fraud hotline reporting, or was, I'm talking about the fraud hotline here.
Yeah, when you say included.
Would they be given that info, as we're, if we got that thing up and running in a more visible presence, is someone going to tell them about it as would get a report?
Sure. Well, there's actually a fraud control policy that outlines what happens, and I could go into that, I suppose, at another time because it's a little lengthy, but there's a group of people that have to come together, and depending on who is accused and what the accusation is, it kind of dictates either it goes to the Board of Ethics, or you bring in an outside firm if it looks like there's been embezzlement, or you go to the, the state's attorney.
So they don't get involved till down the road on that?
Councilor, our involvement would be our review with management. So we would be asking those questions. So typically throughout the year, if we have discussions with management, they should bring that up to date on that particular issue. But it's not like there's a fraud hotline, a report, and immediately advise Ide Bailey.
Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, I hope we're going to be hearing a lot about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and okay, very good. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for coming. Next item on the agenda is item 3B, an overview of proposed changes to audit ordinances and policies. This is just an update I wanted to bring to this group. In this time of transition, With the vacancy in the internal audit manager position, we felt it was a perfect time to take a look at the ordinances, policies, procedures, the job descriptions, and the internal audit charter. The goal was to focus on the organization, personnel, and management specifically. There's a lot of things that we've learned over the years from experience that in some cases worked well and in some cases maybe not so well. We convened a small subgroup to look at all of this. That group consisted of myself, Councilor Kiley, our city clerk, Tom Greco, and our human resources manager, Jane Hannestead. We also consulted Rich Oaksel for audit function and standard-specific expertise when necessary. This was a really important process to go through before we start searching for that next auditor and audit manager. We wanted to make sure we have the best structure in place before we move forward. We spent several weeks looking over all of those details and going over all of the ordinances, charter, the operations manual, and all of these changes that we are going to be bringing forward in the coming weeks will require City Council approval. They will come to an informational meeting, most likely, so the council could take a look at it and have input before it goes on to an agenda. I'll just give you a little high-level description of kind of what we came up with. We looked at moving parts of the audit charter into ordinance, not eliminating it, just moving it into ordinance, because really it's kind of off on the side and people really don't really know it exists a lot. So, but it would still be referred to as the charter in the ordinance because pursuant to audit regulations, we need to have a charter. There's various cleanup in the ordinance. There's a proposal to give the full city council authority to select an audit committee member rather than just the audit chair, so the whole council is more involved in that discussion. We are looking at putting the audit committee's function and powers into the ordinance as well as the audit manager and audit staff powers, just to make it more clear what their powers are and what they aren't. Clarification of how the audit staff are hired and fired and who they report to. And some additions to our operations manual that modifies the reporting structure for audit staff and gets into the very specific details of how we hire, as far as who would be, how many people we would have on a committee, who would be part of it, having a few counselors, having somebody from the audit committee. And at a later date, if all of that is adopted, we would be bringing a proposal to you that has to go to you first to abolish the audit charter, because we would be moving that into ordinance. But obviously that can't happen unless we move it into ordinance. I'm not asking for any action today. I just wanted to get you an update on where we were. And with that, any questions about that item? Seeing none, off to the next one. Item 3C is an audit staffing update. I'm going to cover that as well. The first one is Rich Oaksel, our part-time auditor. Rich has been a huge asset to us. He's been really critical during this time without an internal audit manager to help us get things done. He's done a lot of things that an internal audit manager would do. He's been able to get a lot of things documented, help with training. It's important to note that after the new year, Rich will be scaling back his hours. He'll probably be working a few days a week. He will not be performing audits. He'll be just doing some special tasks and getting processes documented and kind of helping us to finalize that groundwork to hire an audit manager. And he plans to finish his service to us by May of 2019 at the latest. I want to say that we owe Rich a debt of huge gratitude for his work and his service. We couldn't have done this without him, and with him here, we've been able to continue working along, and without him, I'm not sure where we would have been. So I just want to say personally, thanks for all the help that you've given me and the audit committee. Item C2 is a status of the paper performance resolution for city council staff. Tomorrow at the informational meeting, we're going to be bringing forward a proposed resolution that is going to modify the compensation for the internal audit manager and the internal auditor. There was a study that the city did that was delivered to the city council in March of 2018, where they study compensation throughout the organization to make sure that we're keeping pace with the market. And they do that every 8 to 10 years to make sure that we're competitive. And that identified that the internal audit manager, internal audit position, auditor position, excuse me, are low compared to the market. We need to move them up. So we're going to have a proposal that is going to adjust those salaries. And that is a very key part to getting the groundwork in place to hire, because we'll have a new pay structure in place that's going to make it more attractive and be able to get better talent. And so That would be proposed to be voted on on December 11th, and that would go into effect on January 14th, 2019. At that point, we'll be able to post a job opening with a higher salary, and I'm looking forward to that, but the council will discuss that tomorrow at the informational meeting, and there's some other parts that don't affect the audit part. So any questions on that particular item? Councilor Staley.
Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment that having been on the council for 2.5 years, I do have to say that I would think we need to have more definition of what we're expecting from those auditors. Because for a bulk of that time, we had the auditors downstairs, and I didn't know what I could ask them for. I really had nothing to do with them. And I think that for the public to know what we're getting for our money, I mean, we're raising the salary on that, but what exactly are they, what's the public, because it's not the council's money, it's the public's money. So what's the public getting for this department? What is it doing? What's going to be the day-to-day duties of anyone employed in this position? So that we really have something to show for them.
Sure, and
yes, and so.
Yep, I would say that the ordinances and the changes we're talking about bringing forward are going to start to address that. One of the things that we do need to make sure is that there's a clear definition of what the performance standards are and what are the milestones. And there's a lot of things that you can do inside of an internal audit. It can be a little difficult, as I've learned, to be able to quantify some of it, because it's not as black and white as, you know, that you can show that it saved you X amount of money, but there are certain standards. There could be the number of recommendations brought forward and accepted, the number of audits that they get done in a year. There's a number of benchmarks, and we can more or less, every organization can select what are your benchmarks going to be that you're going to be able to review your auditors based on. And that's something that might be an interesting thing to talk to our private members about. So, but it's a good point.
Well, no, and I think, if I may, I think what you said earlier about having the council involved with appointing a new member is wonderful. That's a piece of moving this open for the public and for the council, because again, I got the sense during the first part of this term is that it was kind of a select little group of people that were kind of operating within this, and the rest of we just assumed everything was great. But I didn't really know what, as a council member, what can I expect from these people? What can I ask of these people? And I think that would be a good thing to talk about. So I'm glad you're bringing this to the council. Thank you. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Yep, appreciate it. And one other thing I would point out is something that was identified as we've got to do as much as we can so that we can create those opportunities for touch points where you as a counselor and other counselors are seeing the auditors and vice versa versus having them, you know, kind of down in the basement alone working. That's not good for anybody. So, and those are all of those sort of things that we talked about. So, Dean, did you have a comment?
Yes, a couple of things. I too just like to add, you know, my thanks and to Rich, and he's done a great job for a lot of years for this organization. And then that feeds into a bit of a concern if he's cutting way back now. We're going to be down to one full-time auditor and one limited hour person who's been our leader. And I appreciate the changes in the charter and looking at the pay structure, but I hope all of this doesn't delay our hiring to complete the size of our audit function. People, it's an important function that needs to continue. So I hope we don't have a big pause here and delay all of the tests that we've got scheduled to be done.
Yeah, just to address that is something that we have looked at, but we felt it was really important that we need to get that pay adjusted and we need to get some of those organizational things changed. And we're looking at posting very quickly after we get some of those things in force into January and February. So we're getting there, but government moves slowly sometimes. I guess that's about all I can say. But we are in good hands, and we do have more of a modest audit plan for 2019 that we'll be talking about in a little bit. But I do share your wanting to move forward as quick as possible, but it was really important to get those things in place, and to be able to have the pay structure where we can really look for the talent that we're going to need, particularly to essentially kind of rebuild an organization. So, anything else? Okay, last thing was C3, update on hiring internal audit manager and internal auditor. That's more or less been covered. As soon as we can, once we get these things in place, we plan to post for an internal audit manager first, get them on board, and then they will have ownership into looking for the next internal auditor, since obviously they're going to report to that audit manager. So that's the order we're looking at, and we hope to get moving on that in beginning to middle of February, I think, at this point. So with that, we will go to item 3D, which is the IIA new internal auditor training for Abby Vandelinati. I just wanted to just give a real quick update, just so the committee is aware. Abby did go to a class in October for a week. It was a very good investment for the city council and for the audit committee. She came back with a lot of information. She spoke very highly of it, and it looks like it will be a great class to send another auditor to in the future. I just wanted to bring it up because it was something that we invested in as a city council, and it's important, I think, for you to know that it was considered successful and that it was a very good class. And she's here if you have any questions. So.
I'd just like to add that, and that was one of the things that was part of this whole review of what the responsibilities of our internal our audit manager was going to be, as well as the internal auditor too. And then along the way, I mean, describing what their duties were going to be and determining what their duties are. We going to keep them as they already are, or are we going to make changes? And we felt that that was a process that needed to be done before the hiring, as Chairman Neitzert has mentioned, because we certainly didn't want to hire somebody and then change the scope of their responsibilities, add responsibilities, or delete responsibilities after that. And in that process, it was discovered that our internal auditors had limited training once they arrived, little opportunity for training, and so this particular training we believe was absolutely vital and hopefully beneficial as well too. And so it's something that we plan on continuing in the future, so that we're not going to just add somebody and then, okay, swim or sink scenario that we'd had before. So it's a big step.
Anything else? Well, in the interest of keeping things moving, we will move on to number 4, which A, Audit Report 1801, Great Bear Recreation Park Audit Report, and that will be presented by Abby Vandelinati. Welcome, Abby.
Good afternoon. We're in business now. Abby Vandelinati, Internal Auditor, here to present the Great Bear Recreation Park Contract Agreement Audit. The City of Sioux Falls owns Great Bear Recreation Park. An agreement exists between the city and Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated that Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated will operate, manage, plan, and develop Great Bear. The purpose of the audit is to determine Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated's compliance with the management agreement and whether adequate controls are in place to monitor Great Bear operations. The audit focuses on Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated's compliance, city controls over contract monitoring, Great Bear cash receipts and disbursements, and city fixed asset existence. The city entered into a management agreement with Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated for the management and development of Great Bear. The agreement that was reviewed under the scope of this audit was entered into on April 12, 2013, and expired on April 30th, 2018. Please note, a new contract was signed on March 30th, 2018, and is effective through April 30th, 2023. This new agreement was not reviewed as a part of this audit. The objectives of this audit were to, 1, determine if Great Bear is compliant with the following major requirements of the management agreement. Proper insurance coverage is maintained. Required financial reports are provided to the city on a timely basis. Verify operating funds are being used for their stated purpose. 2, determine if the city has adequate internal controls in place to ensure Great Bear is compliant with the terms of the management agreement. 3, determine if proper internal controls are in place to protect cash receipts and disbursements of Great Bear. And 4, determine if city fixed assets under the control of Great Bear truly exist and are properly safeguarded and reported. The scope of this audit included a review of the terms of the agreement effective April 12, 2013 through April 30th, 2018. It included a review of the transactions and activity that took place from May 1st, 2016 through April 30th, 2017, and internal controls as they are currently in place. Our audit work is listed at the bottom of page 3. The results of our audit include the following. The results of the Great Bear contract compliance objective are as follows. Insurance type and coverage amounts were verified and agree with Section 9 of the management agreement. A judgmental sample of expenses was reviewed. It was determined that funds from the operating account are being spent on Great Bear operations, maintenance, and development. A sample of purchasing card statements was reviewed. It was determined that funds from the operating account are being spent appropriately. We verified that Great Bear did in fact file the major required financial reports with the city. However, the timeline is unclear. The opportunity for improvement on page 8 addresses this. We did note 2 missing purchasing card receipts as well as 2 recurring online purchases where the documentation was not printed off to include with the purchasing card statement for verification. This was an isolated occurrence. The results of the city internal controls over contract compliance are as follows. Based on our interviews with city management, we determined that the Parks and Recreation Administrative Manager has begun to maintain a contract checklist to ensure that Great Bear is meeting the terms of the management agreement. This checklist was implemented in 2018 and will be updated throughout the course of the year each year the contract is in place. The Parks and Recreation Administrative Manager will ultimately be responsible for updating the checklist and ensuring both parties are compliant with the terms of the contract. However, there are some pieces of the checklist that will be maintained by the business analyst assigned to Parks and Finance. This working relationship, along with the working relationship with the District Park Supervisor, should ensure that this contract is being monitored and followed as expected by both parties. The contract checklist is a working document, meaning changes will be made by the Parks and Recreation Administrative Manager to improve it whenever necessary. Based on the evaluation performed, we determined that adequate internal controls are in place to monitor compliance. At the time of our review, we noted that the checklist listed employee names under the responsible party heading. Also, it was not stated on the checklist when specific items are to be received and or reviewed for compliance. At the time of our final meeting with Parks and Recreation Management at the end of the audit, some of these updates had already been made to the checklist. The checklist now includes a frequency column which indicates how often each item should be received and or reviewed. The opportunity for improvement on page 8 addresses this as well. The results regarding cash receipts and disbursements are as follows. The Great Bear Board of Directors has oversight over monthly financial statements. They receive and review monthly financial statements. Cameras are located on each point of sale register. An individual independent of Great Bear reviews monthly bank statements and does a monthly bank reconciliation. Point of sale registers are counted and verified the previous night by the manager on duty and again the following morning prior to the start of the business day. Each user of the point of sale system has a unique ID and password that they use to sign on to the system. Checks over $5,000 require 2 signatures and deposits are made timely and frequently. The following audit findings on page 6 were noted during the audit. Audit finding 1, due to the relatively small size of staff at Great Bear, practical internal control cannot be achieved as it relates to segregation of duties. Job duties are segregated to the extent possible given the small staff structure. This has been recognized and stated in the annual external audit report that is performed. Great Bear does have board oversight to address and mitigate this risk. In regards to check signing, the general manager, Great Bear Recreation Incorporated, is assigned authority and signs all checks, including payroll. It was found in reviewing the bank statements that the general manager signs all checks, including checks made out to the general manager. In addition to payroll checks, there are isolated cases when the general manager would write a check to be reimbursed for a Great Bear expense that was paid for personally. After a discussion with Parks and Recreation Management, it was determined that going forward, there will be board oversight for this process in order to mitigate the risk of inappropriate cash disbursements. Audit recommendation on page 7 addresses this. Audit finding 2, in reviewing the Great Bear Operations Manual and interviewing the general manager, we found that Great Bear does not have written instructions for cash receipt procedures or point of sale register procedures. There are also no start of day or end of day procedures documented for staff to follow. And there are no policies and procedures that specifically address the purchasing card program in the operations manual. In discussing the purchasing card program with the general manager, we found that the general manager reviews the monthly purchasing card statement and pays the purchasing card bill. There is no independent party that reviews each monthly purchasing card statement. Audit recommendation 2 addresses this. And the final result of our testing for city fixed assets are as follows. We judgmentally selected a sample of assets from Munis, the city's accounting system, and went out to Great Bear to verify asset existence. We determined that city assets in our sample do truly exist, are located at Great Bear, and are properly safeguarded to the extent possible. Based on the testing performed, we determined that city fixed assets under the control of Great Bear do truly exist and are properly safeguarded and reported. We made the following audit recommendations that address the above referenced results. Recommendation 1, which addresses audit finding 1. We recommend that a designated member of the Great Bear Board of Directors sign all checks made out to the general manager, Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated. Due to the relatively small staff size at Great Bear, it is recognized that ideal internal control cannot be achieved as it relates to separation of duties. In light of this, best practices recommend board oversight surrounding cash disbursements. Management's response: all checks made out to Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated General Manager are now being signed by a designated member of the Great Bear Board of Directors as of 10/1/2018. On page 8, audit recommendation 2, which addresses audit finding 2, we recommend that Great Bear Management, along with the Great Bear Board of Directors, create and document policies and procedures for their purchasing card program. These policies and procedures should be kept current, and the board should ensure that they are consistently followed by staff. We also recommend that an independent review of the monthly purchasing card statement be done as well to ensure oversight over the purchasing card program. Management's response was all purchasing card transactions will have receipts matched to statements and will be reviewed by an independent party effective 11/14/2018. We'll have our operations manual updated by 11/2018 to include the above and guest services procedures. We also identified the following opportunity for improvement to the contract monitoring checklist that Parks and Recreation Management may want to implement in the future. We recommend that the contract monitoring checklist list specific job titles under the responsible party heading, because often employees change positions or leave the company entirely, which would leave the checklist out of date and unclear as to whose responsibility it is to monitor that piece of the contract checklist. To conclude, Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated is in compliance with the major points of the management agreement, and the city has established controls to monitor the compliance of the management agreement. Based upon our audit design and tests, we did not identify any unusual activity and do not have reason to believe Great Bear is out of compliance with the management agreement. The recommendations above, which are based on industry best practices, will provide additional controls designed to protect cash and cash disbursements and mitigate the risk of errors or fraud. We would like to thank the Parks and Recreation Department as well as Great Bear Management and staff for their cooperation and assistance provided during this audit. This time I'll take any questions. We also have Dan Greider, Jackie Nelson, and Don Carney in the audience as well.
All right. Thank you, Abby.
Yes.
Questions for Abby? Councilor Kiley.
Abby, with the recommendation there, your first recommendation, all checks made out to the Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated General Manager are now being signed by a designated member of the Great Bear Board of Directors. that addresses the signing, but who actually verifies that the expense is an appropriate expense, that receipts match the invoice or their expense voucher, any calculations have been completed appropriately? Who does that
Dan, can I call on you?
for
to
the
answer?
signature?
Dan Greider, General Manager at Great Bear Recreation Park. In response to your question, I do those on a monthly basis where we just match receipts to statements. And then our external audit that is done annually, they go through samples of all of our invoices.
Okay, so it's after the fact, in other words, then?
After the fact, sir.
You're saying that it would, they would be verified in an audit after the check has been issued?
Correct, sir.
Okay. I would suggest maybe we look into that further and put in place a process that would verify that right away up front before checks are issued.
Any other questions from the committee? Rose?
Oh, yeah, I was wondering if you guys did any work on, I was wondering if you guys did any work on cash receipts as part of, as, you know, you have some statistics here of attendance and whatnot. Did you?
We did do testing on expenses from the operation account and then purchasing card receipts. Yep.
Any other questions? If not, I have a couple. I don't know whether you looked at this as part of the audit. This might be a question for Dan, but I was just curious as I was reading the audit and thinking about it. If there's an accident at Great Bear, if there's an injury, is there a mandatory reporting to our risk management department, or is there, it's,
I didn't look at that as part of the
okay,
audit.
could I just,
In regards to any injuries at Great Bear, there is not a procedure where we notify the city. If it's a major incident where there might be some insurance or something like that, then the city is notified of that.
okay, all right. And I'm not sure how we do it at others, but I've just, as I thought about it, when we have, you know, city-owned property and something happens, whether our contracts require that, so, very interesting. Okay. My other question was, it talked about background checks for, it says there's a lot of young employees, and it talked about the expense, and I don't remember what the verbiage was, but background check would not be practical given the nature of the typical employee. Is that just getting at the fact that a teenager probably doesn't have a lot of background, or what, is that kind of what that was
Right,
trying to
and
say?
it's often their first job. I don't know if Dan wants to speak more to that.
Yes, in regard to background checks in kids, a lot of those records are sealed until they're 18. You can't get at that anyways. And then when we have looked into background checks, there are so many layers of, you know, federal, state, local, that it's really hard to, if you came to us from out of state, we would have no record of your background.
Sure. That makes sense. Okay, fair enough. And then my last question is, in terms of the maintenance of the equipment, and I think it touched on that, maybe our new system is going to cover that, you know, so if we have all these different machines out there that presumably need to have oil changes and expensive equipment, so how is that tracked, and how will that be tracked going forward to make sure our equipment is being maintained and taken care of?
Right, so the maintenance, Great Bear is responsible for daily maintenance and repairs up to $250. And then anything above and beyond that is the city's responsibility. So we did not look at that as a part of this particular audit. That would be something that would be included in a future audit. Right now, there is a new software that will be implemented citywide that will include like the asset management and the maintenance of every single piece of equipment and building and so forth, so.
Okay, and are you aware if it's the equipment is in the, I guess I'll call it the custody of the third party such as this, if they're going to be doing the same sort of tracking and follow-up to make sure that that stuff is being done?
Right, so the inventory is done and sent back to Parks and Recreation so that all the pieces of equipment are accounted for. Was that your question?
Yeah, well, yeah, and also just that, like internally, for example, the example I've been given is they might be checking to make sure that the furnace is serviced every year inside of Carnegie and things like that. But in assets that are essentially kind of held by this third party, that we're also following up to make sure that they're doing that as well and that it's getting into the system, that the maintenance is being done and repaired and.
Yes, and as far as like furnace and HVAC and so forth and inspections and that elevator maintenance and stuff, the city has a contract with a third party that does that for every city-owned building citywide, which includes Great Bear.
Okay, it does.
Yep, so those preventative maintenance measures are being taken.
So that part is covered. It's the other part, which would be, again, like this snowmobiles and everything else with motors and things like that. Okay, very good. Looks like Dan might have one other comment. Go ahead and come on up to the podium, and I want to get you on the microphone.
Yeah, if I can just kind of help clarify that a little bit. All the major assets at Great Bear are owned by the city. And so when it comes to like snowmobiles, chairlifts, snow guns, that's all city property and the city maintains that. We do not do that. The only thing that we, Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated, own out at Great Bear, office equipment, tables, chairs, televisions, things like that.
Okay, so
The city maintains everything else.
So Park Ops comes out and they take care of servicing this equipment and things like that?
Correct, sir.
Okay, all right, so we've already got that covered.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Very helpful. Anything else from the committee? Seeing none, I'm going to look for a motion to accept the report and submit it to the mayor and city council. Can I get a motion?
I so move.
Second?
Moved by Sale and seconded by Kylie. Any comments? All in favor say yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next is item 4B, Audit Report 1806, Fraud Risk Assessment, and that is going to be presented by Rich Oaksall.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may just say something, I have a piano student, I teach at 5:30, so I'd asked the chair before the meeting how long this might last, so I'm going to have to leave about 20 after 5 just to let people know, but I assure you I will be watching this, the proceedings. These are wonderful things. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Rich, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The fraud risk assessment is required under the fraud control policy, which you mentioned earlier in this meeting. So every 5 years, internal audit's required to do this. This is the report that I prepared. I have a little background information. I'm not going to go through all of it, but we use the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, their information. They do a wonderful job of researching fraud and the types of fraud, and they have a whole certification program and training that they provide. There's 3 broad categories there: asset misappropriation, which is a fancy way of saying stealing. There's financial statement fraud, and there's corruption. So those are the 3 big categories that the ACFE identifies. And within those broad categories, there's subcategories. I think there's like 33 different fraud schemes that they've come up with. Globally, they estimate that organizations in general, whether for-profit, not-for-profit, government, lose about 5% of their revenue. Those are always guesstimates based upon surveys of organizations. Nobody really knows for sure how much is taken by fraud. That's their best guess based upon their yearly surveys of organizations. The median loss for all organizations, according to their survey in 2016, was $150,000. Median duration of a fraud was 18 months. Obviously, the better the internal controls, the more quickly the fraud was discovered. For government organizations, they said at the federal level, the typical fraud was $194,000 that was lost. At the state level, $100,000. At the local level, it was 80,000. There's been a particular fraud at a local government level that has received a lot of media attention in the last 6 years. Dixon, Illinois, that fraud was $53 million. And if you have a Netflix subscription, you can watch a documentary upon that fraud. It's called All the Queen's Horses. Is that correct? So if you're interested, get on Netflix, look for a documentary, All the Queen's Horses. That was certainly an outlier, and it was a very shocking story. There's no typical profile of a fraudster. They come from every demographic group. The presence of anti-fraud controls, as I said, was correlated with lower fraud losses. So the more your controls are in place and tested, the better chance you have of a fraud if it's discovered, not getting too far. Many managers believe no one in their organization is stealing from them. That's not true. Any organization of any size or complexity is going to have somebody that's trying to steal or misappropriate some assets. The 5 objectives we had in this assessment were to identify the type of fraud cases the city as an organization has experienced. Number 2, identify assets, situations, or processes that have a moderate or high inherent fraud risk. Number 3, identify the key controls or activities related to fraud prevention and detection. Number 4, research a list of leading practices and then see if the city has those in place. And number 5, identify action steps going forward. So we did some review of the literature. We looked at fraud assessments that we've done in the past. We interviewed all of the 11 city directors and their management teams. And due to the constraints of time and resources, we assessed inherent risk only. We didn't go into the residual risk. The results, so the fraud cases the city has experienced there, we had a corruption case about 20 years ago. I won't read that for you, but you can look at that. We had 2 cases at the sanitary landfill of asset misappropriation. That was a skimming cash situation back in the mid-90s and then in the early 2000s. We had a situation at the municipal golf course in the late 1990s, again, cash skimming. That's a real simple, unsophisticated scheme, but a lot of money can go missing if it's not discovered quickly. Occasional, I would say, isolated incidents of P-card misuse. And the latest one we had was in April of this year with the ACH, that's the automatic clearinghouse fraud. We had a press release back in April. The finance department was a victim of that. So you can read about that if you're unfamiliar with that case. Number 2, the situations, assets, processes with a moderate to high inherent risk. Certainly cash and cash equivalents, we would put in that inherent risk. Investments, top of page 5 there, payroll, possible management override of controls, and simply the volume of funds that are processed by payroll. And that would also include pension payroll. Purchasing cards, that'll be our next audit. That's already on the 2018 plan. We'll be starting that shortly. They have inherent risk of misuse. Grant funding, capital assets, especially if they're reasonably portable, that they could be converted to private use. Those type of assets would have moderate risk of fraud. And then finally, entities managing city facilities, what we just talked about with Great Bear, and we came up with a list of 6 of those contracts. Now, the one thing that has a high inherent fraud risk is cyber threats. For example, the city of Atlanta in March of this year, they had a massive ransomware attack. It shut down the city for days. They were being held hostage. It was like, pay up the money or we will not unlock your computer. They were able to unlock their computer. It took tremendous effort. City officials were resorting to filling out paper forms by hand because they couldn't use the computers. They were locked up. So that's a tremendous threat. If it happens, it can cause a lot of staff time and it can be just a tremendous threat there. So overall, we would assess the city at most risk for either corruption schemes or misappropriation of assets. Financial statement fraud is the least common, according to the ACFE survey. City managers don't have any direct financial incentive to cook the books. They don't get compensated on the share price of the city, so it's less of a risk in our opinion. Key controls or control activities, certainly bank reconciliations, we mentioned that on the Great Bear audit we just talked about. That's a key control. The master vendor file. So the master vendor file is a list of all the companies that we do business with. Access to that master vendor file has to be severely limited, just to the people that need to know that, people that can change the information on the bank routing number or the address to where the payments would go. That's a critical control. Certainly the personnel master file, similar to that. That's a list of all the authorized employees, including their authorized pay. Authority, access and authority to make changes should be severely limited. Nobody should be able to go in there and change the pay of somebody or access the bank account information of employee. That should be severely limited on a need-to-know basis. Certainly segregation of duties, a key control concept, sometimes called checks and balances. According to the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, known as COSO, they're the ones that come up with the definition of internal control. Control environment is the most critical. That's sometimes known as corporate culture, tone at the top. It's management's operating style and philosophy that kind of filters down through the whole organization. That's the most critical control. It's kind of a soft control. It's kind of one of those soft and fuzzy things, but it's so important. It can often compensate for weak other controls if you have a good control environment. And also filters down into creating a positive workplace where employees are engaged in their work. They're less likely to, if they're engaged in their work, they're less likely to consider defrauding their organization or tolerate those who do. We came up with a list of, I think there's 14 on here, leading practices related to fraud prevention and detection. Obviously, number one, establish an audit committee, an independent internal audit function that is implemented. EAPs, employee assistance plans, those are important. We've had those for over 10 years now at the city. Obviously, establishing segregation of duties. Obtaining employee dishonesty insurance, that's a state requirement to have that coverage. Requiring random drug screenings in testing of employees. We do that, background checks of all new hires. Fixed asset inventory records and make sure those are reviewed regularly to make sure none of our fixed assets have grown legs and walked away. Placement of surveillance cameras in areas of vulnerability. We have those in certain situations like the sanitary landfill at the gate there, where cash is received and processed, or we've had situations in the past with stealing of cash. Access to key data, regular review of department revenue, expenses and budget performance, establishing a fraud, waste and abuse hotline. We've had that since 2008. Computer security measures. You remember I said that cyber threats have a high inherent risk. Computer security measures like firewalls, having various other controls in place are extremely important, and we've done internal audits of that situation. IT, information technology, has used consultants to help them with that. Eide Bailly has reviewed that with their computer experts as well. Implementing a code of conduct and a fraud policy, we have those in place. And certainly what we mentioned before, fraud awareness training. We just had Eide Bailly with their forensic experts come in here in September of this year and do training. In 2013, we also had experts from Eide Bailly come in and do training for our mid-management group. We would certainly like to see that continue. So action steps. Based on our assessment, we identified a few isolated cases where the city may receive revenue that wasn't budgeted for, it wasn't invoiced, that we call them orphan checks. It's just money that kind of just shows up. It's not very common, but we'll certainly check into that and see if there's a couple of things we can do as auditors to make sure that that money wasn't misappropriated. That would be an ideal situation if an employee that was in a mind to steal money Knew that the check was never expected, so nobody would ever notice if it went missing. That would be subject to misappropriation. We're going to check in to see if we can increase the employee dishonesty insurance coverage. Can it be increased? Should it be increased? We'll follow up on that. We're going to identify opportunities for more continuous auditing of payroll, procurement, accounts payable activities using data analysis software. We've done that on a limited basis when I was working full-time. We think maybe we can continue that, maybe formalize that, put that on a regular schedule. There's a lot of things you can do as auditors with software to kind of do this continual auditing. P-card audit, as I mentioned, that's the next audit on our audit plan. That'll be starting very, very soon. Abby and I will start discussing planning for that audit tomorrow. Again, we advocate periodic training in fraud awareness for employees. Information technology will be conducting training for city employees next year specific to what is known as phishing scams. And we'll review administration's efforts to promote a positive work environment. We'll review management's plans to offer ethics training to all city employees. Last citywide ethics training was conducted in 2007, so we're kind of overdue on that. So I know somebody in the attorney's office, I believe, is working on that already. And finally, a death audit. That's for pension recipients. A death audit is simply you hire a consultant to look at all the available databases to see if one of your beneficiaries or so a recipient appears to be dead, and they check the Social Security database, other databases, just to make sure that they're still alive and that a family member isn't simply cashing the money. Somebody that has control over the, say, wherever a bank account that the pension checks get direct deposited into. That has happened in Atlanta, and it's happened in Philadelphia, where they had major scandals in the pension office with employees or family members that were cashing checks of people that were dead. So a death audit is very inexpensive. I think last time we did it in 2003, it was about $500. We had no findings, so it's probably time to do it again and put it on a regular schedule. And so that would be an action step going forward. So our conclusion, we said that the city is robust in developing and implementing and monitoring anti-fraud controls. Any large and complex organization like the city is at risk. You can never completely eliminate that risk or make it all low inherent risk. It's just a continual struggle, especially with the cyber threats. It seems like the bad guys are always 3 steps ahead of the good guys, so that's always a continual battle. So are there any questions on that?
Okay, thank you, Rich. Any questions for Rich? Councilor Sale.
Rich, I have 2 things. First off, I want to say on the death benefit pension,
Yeah.
I am actually receiving a pension from the city. I don't cash the checks. It is a family member, but I am still alive.
Okay.
So I wouldn't qualify.
Well, we'll cross you off the list. You are alive. Yeah.
Secondly, is there any controls on departments that might direct a contract to one vendor versus another vendor? How do we monitor that? It might be the pension board picking one investment advisor over another based on any kind of kickbacks, or is that part of this?
That's a complex question. A lot of it depends on state contracting laws and bidding laws and that sort of thing. If it's under certain, as a general rule, if it's under a certain dollar threshold, departments have some discretion in who gets the business. If it meets a certain dollar threshold, then it has to be bid. If it's for supply and materials. Now, if it's for professional services, then it's under state law. You don't bid professional services. We usually go through an RFP process where we first of all have a committee to go through the RFP. We ask for requests for proposals. They don't have final authority. Normally, then it would go to the city council based on the recommendation of the. So it's complicated, but does that kind of give you an idea of?
That's very thorough, and I appreciate that. Do you have any knowledge of the last time that might have happened in our city?
Corruption scheme?
Yeah.
The one I'm aware of is that one from I think it was back in the 90s where it was, we would have this reoccurring contract every year for relining the sewer lines or the water lines, and we do those contracts every year. They periodically, or they regularly reline those pipes to make sure they last as long as we would expect them to last. And so there was an out-of-state contractor, I believe they were from the East Coast, maybe New Jersey, that approached a local contractor and with the idea of, okay, let's collude on this bid, okay? You and I will decide, because there was very few contractors that did that kind of work. It was maybe one or two in the city. So in those situations, it's a lot easier to arrange for collusion because you don't have a street project where you have 20 companies that will bid on it. And so they approached the contractor. He listened. He immediately went, I believe, to the mayor and said, okay, I've been approached. What do I do? And he was told, keep meeting with him, and we'll try to set him up.
But those were non-city employees.
They were non-city employees,
So
yes. It was a local contractor. Now, would that have been discovered? Corruption schemes are hard to find and hard to prove. They're very sticky business because there's a few things you can do as auditors. You can kind of look at, like, there's a pattern of rotation on bids. Like if there's a certain type of project that you bid every year, does it look like the auditor or the contractors are rotating? You know, like maybe there's 3 contractors that do it, like each year they just rotate. You almost have to have a tip, though. You almost have to have somebody that says, I think this is going on. They're notoriously hard to spot. So it probably doesn't raise your comfort level, I don't think, but
No, but
that's what I'm aware of.
I guess I would feel comfortable. You haven't seen any city councilors drive up with a $120,000 BMW just because of a contract.
No, I have not seen that. I know it has happened in other cities where individual contracts can be approved or definitely influenced by one council member. Happened in Detroit. I know the FBI gets involved in those cases because I think that's under their jurisdiction, where they will have confidential informants, or where they will put microphones in offices, and usually the FBI gets involved if they get a whiff of corruption schemes. I'm not aware if it's ever happened here. I mean, I've been a city employee for a long, long time.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions? I do have a couple. Who would do the death audit? Is that something that we would contract, or is that something
we
HR
hired a
would do?
company? I think they're based in Ohio. I have the name of the company, and they specialize in that sort of type of audit. And as I remember in 2003, it was only $500. And the reason we found out about them is because we'd read the report from the city of Philadelphia on their pension audit. And they'd come across 178 cases of family members spending the money of a dead relative that was receiving a pension. So we asked them, who did you use? And they told us, okay, we use this company. And so then we contacted them, and they did the audit for us. Yeah.
So, but I mean, mechanically, did the audit division lead it, or did you go to HR and finance?
Yeah, well,
and say, hey,
we talked to HR, and
you
they
should do
said
this.
they need a magnetic tape of listing all the pension recipients or beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. And then once they get the magnetic tape back, and that was the technology back then, and they would run that list, that database, through their proprietary search. And then if they had what they thought was a positive, then it was, I think, $25 to locate the death certificate to prove that person was deceased. So we had no findings on that. So
very good. My last comment is number 7 in your action steps. I can give a little update on that. I just talked to the city attorney's office today. They are rolling out an ethics training. They just started offering it. It's on Insight. It's not to all employees, it's going to be a class that you can go to. And they are going to be providing our fraud hotline, and that it's there and available. And then also with all new hires, they will have an ethics training as part of their orientation, and that will include fraud hotline and you know, who else, you can go to HR, you can go to the city attorney. So, and that was Colleen Moran, the city attorney, who created that ethics training, and it is just rolling out in the last week or so. So, Dean.
Rich, I think this type of in-depth fraud risk review or assessment is one of the most important things that our internal audit people probably do for us. How often is this done?
Well, it was overdue. We were, according to the policy, we're supposed to do it every 5 years. I did it in 2013, so or maybe I did in 2012. I think we were it'd been 6 years, I think, since I'd done it, so it was overdue by a year. I mean, you could do it every year, but I don't think much would change. So I think 5 years was kind of a, you know, that's what we put in the policy, the fraud control policy.
Okay, I would think 5 would be the absolute max. I'd like to see it every 3 or.
Yeah, and now when we do individual audits, and it's part of the planning process, then we do a risk assessment. We consider fraud risk on each individual audit, you know, of things that come to our mind, like, okay, or based on our past experience, you know, what controls should we be seeing, so.
And when was the last time that we had a fully staffed internal audit department?
I'm not sure. Greg, do you know, or?
Well, it would have been
Early this year?
yeah, it would have been up until about June was when we had the attrition, I guess. So
it's probably going to be at least 9 months
Before
period of time before we're fully, you know, starting June to when we're fully staffed. And it, you know, it's one of the most important things, one of the most important controls that we can have is to have that internal audit department. So I raised that point, but I just want to emphasize that's this committee's responsibility. And so I take that as something that we need to make sure we get done.
very, very good. And I should mention that this fraud risk assessment played heavily into the development of the proposed 2019 audit plan. So, and you'll see that when we get to that. Any other, Councilor Kiley?
I'd just like to say, Rich, it seems very natural to see you up at the podium during a audit committee. Thank you very much for your service these past several months and for the guidance that you have provided all of us, really. It's very helpful. And I'd just say, in terms of fraud, it was mentioned earlier or implied that maybe it's not as important for small communities as it is for large communities. And I just, I mean, I do believe that Sioux Falls, as this assessment illustrates, that we do have a lot of checks and balances in place, but a small community in Illinois was defrauded out of over $54 million by a comptroller who had no checks and balances beyond her. Interestingly enough, she's in the news again because she's still collecting royalties from show horses that she purchased through ill-gained funds. But anyway.
I can tell you also a larger city, 4 years ago, city of Pasadena, California, the home of the Rose Bowl and the Rose Parade. It's about the size of Sioux Falls. And they had a major embezzlement in late 2014, about a $6 million, and it was a management employee that was in charge of a certain fund and had total control. And they had gotten rid of the internal audit function in 2011 as a cost-saving move. They didn't see the need for it, and then 3 years later, they had a major, I watched the city council meeting. When the news came out, they had a special meeting of the city council. It looked a lot like this room, and the room was packed with irate citizens, and it was a 3.5-hour scolding of the council by the citizens. So please don't eliminate the internal audit function.
Very good. With that, can I get a motion to accept the report and submit it to the mayor and city council?
So moved.
Second, Kylie?
All right, moved by Dean and seconded by Councilor Kiley. Any comments? All those in favor vote yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Next item, item 4C, Audit Report 1805, Citywide Risk Assessment. Rich.
Okay, so another risk assessment. This is not just focusing on the fraud risk, but the citywide risk. We try to do this on a regular basis. It helps us develop the annual audit plan, decide what to audit, what not to audit, since resources are limited. We define risk as any chosen action or activity or failure to act that could result in an undesirable income, okay? Something bad happened. If the risk is not identified and mitigated or controlled, you could have a financial loss, you could have reputational damage to the city, you could have injuries to employees or citizens, you could have a failure to provide the expected level of municipal services to the citizens. And risk can be accepted, avoided, transferred, or mitigated. Those are at least 4 different ways. There's probably a few others too. And we kind of lumped them into 4 different categories there: hazard risks, financial risk, operational risk, compliance risks. On top of page 3, I'd mentioned COSO before. COSO is the Committee of Sponsoring Organization. There's a footnote at the bottom there of the who came up with that, the COSO definition of internal control. That's the generally accepted definition of internal control in the accounting world. It's been modified several times since 1992. The point I want to make is management is responsible for designing and implementing internal controls. Auditors, review it, test it, give their opinion on it. Management is responsible. We hold management responsible for the performance of their divisions, and we give our opinion on that. And sometimes management accepts our opinions or our suggestions or recommendations. Sometimes they don't, but ultimately they're held accountable for the performance of their organization. And ultimately, certainly in the corporate world, ultimately it's the board of directors that are accountable. In local government, that would be the elected officials, the mayor and the city council would be your board of directors. And so they have ultimate responsibility for that, and they're assisted in their responsibilities by internal auditors, external auditors, city attorney, finance department, human resources. You have consultants, you have external or you have state and federal regulators that also help management and the board with their responsibilities. So our objectives were to identify the biggest risks that we're currently facing. What are the risks that, say, in the next 5 to 10 years, something that's on the horizon, not quite here yet. Identify the departments with the greatest inherent risks. Identify processes and contracts and agreements with the greatest inherent risks. Look at identify areas of coverage for 2019 and future years for internal audit, and identify a significant risk currently faced, how they're currently controlled and mitigated, recent audit coverage of those risks. And that's on a separate document, much more detailed. So the results, the biggest current risk, the consensus of management, and we would concur with that, was that maintaining expected level of service to a rapidly growing city is a huge risk. Maintaining infrastructure, public safety services, cultural and recreational services and amenities is just a day-to-day challenge for the city. Tax revenue growth, particularly in sales tax, it's been less than the historical rates of growth. That's been a challenge, so you have maybe a little less money than you were used to getting in the last 20 years. And certainly cyber threats, what we just mentioned on that fraud risk assessment report. Some other areas that directors or managers mentioned were increase in lawsuits where the city is a defendant, rising crime rate, transit system funding, that's a big issue. Natural disasters such as the emerald ash borer infestation and flooding. The supply of affordable housing is not keeping up with the demand, with potentials for political demonstrations that could disrupt traffic and strain law enforcement resources. For example, the Keystone Pipeline. Fraud in general, management turnover as key managers retire, and future risks. In the next 5 to 10 years, things are on the horizon. Certainly technology could result in now unforeseen challenges and risks. Example would be smart cities. I kind of defined that at the footnote there, what a smart city is. Ensuring that our city workforce is educated and trained for the technology that they'll be required to use in their jobs. Climate change, that could increase weather events such as blizzards and torrential rains. Seems like the 100-year rains are now every 5 or 10 years instead of every 100 years. Active shooter events, succession planning, recruitment and retention of city employees. We compete in the marketplace for good employees. And with unemployment being very low, it can be a real challenge to recruit and retain city employees. The MOUs, that's major organizational unit, MOUs. Based on a previous risk assessment that we did in 2015, we had identified the 4 top MOUs with the highest inherent risk as public works, police, health, and affordable housing. And there's the bullet points list, the criteria we used back in 2015 to come up with our list of highest inherent risk. We would drop affordable housing off that list now. They were on there on 2015 because of requests from management, time since the last audit, and they had a management turnover as well. So we would drop them off the high down into the moderate category. So the top 3 would be public works, police, and health. They've received extensive internal audit coverage in the last 10 years, and they just have a lot of risk. Okay, on the top of page 6 there, city business processes or contracts and agreements with the greatest inherent risk. We would identify payroll, including pension payroll, certainly accounts payable, and then purchasing and procurement to include P cards, purchasing cards. We identified the 6 big contracts or agreements. Those are the ones that we entered into to manage city-owned facilities. So the SMG contract for the entertainment venues like the Denny Sanford Premier Center. That's one contract for all those venues. That's under one contract. And then there's that separate agreement with Ovations to provide the food and beverages. Number 2 is the management of the transit system. Number 3, the Washington Pavilion. Number 4, the municipal golf courses. Number 5, Great Bear, which you just heard the audit report. And then the Sioux Falls Zoological Society agreement to manage the zoo. And Abby is wrapping that work up as we speak this week. So you'll be getting that at the next meeting. We did note that the city has been moving toward more centralization and formalization of risk management activities. I gave some examples there. We would certainly encourage that movement in that direction. In the for-profit world, the buzzword is ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. There aren't a lot of local governments that use enterprise risk management. That is very, very common in Fortune 500 companies. I can tell you in Canada and the United Kingdom and Australia, a lot of local governments they'll call it ERM. They will use that. It's less common in the United States. We would probably say that's maybe a little bit too ambitious for Sioux Falls at this point, but we would recommend that the city adopt the GFOA's best practice. GFOA is Government Finance Officers Association. They recommend that state, local, and provincial governments adopt the COSO framework, which I mentioned as their framework for managing risk and controlling activities. So I would recommend movement in that direction going into 2019, and maybe possibly have the city council adopt that as a policy, that the city would use the COSO model. Internal audit coverage, they're on page 7 for 2019, and your chair will be going over the 2019 proposed audit plan shortly here. We'd recommend in 2018 and following years that we look at those major business processes. They could be addressed on a rotating schedule, say every 4 years, or what may be more efficient though is to do the more development of continuous monitoring and auditing, and looking at the high-risk transactions, and do that on a more timely basis rather than waiting every 3 or 4 years to look at that. We could do an audit of the city's business continuity plan, the COOP they call it, and there's several other ideas there on page 7 there. Okay, we'll look at that. Well, let's we'll just go to the bottom of page 7 here, and then we'll look at that other document here. So recommendations going forward that we just continue to move in that direction of more formalization and centralization, and there's some specific points there. Number 2, the Public Works Director suggested that the Executive Director of the South Dakota Public Assurance Alliance has a presentation that he would more than likely be very happy to present to the Audit Committee. Mark Cotter had heard this presentation earlier this year, and the Director is the former City Attorney for Sioux Falls, David Fifley, and I'm sure he'd be delighted to come and present to the Audit Committee and anybody we'd want to invite on what kind of torts and liabilities and lawsuits that municipalities in South Dakota are facing. And I think that'd be very interesting to such a presentation. And number 3, that going forward here, we'll kind of review the current audit universe and update it, especially looking at any entities that receive money or collect money on behalf of the city that aren't, we're not talking about the golf course, we know about that, but are anything that we think we should add to the current audit universe and what the audit frequency should be and that sort of thing. So we'd like to be able to present that to the Audit Committee at the next meeting, which is likely to be this spring here, probably April 2019, if we can work that out. Let's go to that next document, Abby. That's the detailed information. I'm not going to go into every single thing there, but that just gives you an idea of citywide risks. I think it's about a 9-page document or 8 pages where we describe the risk, we show the mitigation and control strategies that the city has, and give you an idea when the last time it was audited, whether by internal audit or by Eide Bailey or by basically accreditation. For example, the fire rescue was originally accredited a number of years ago, and then every so often they have to go through a re-accreditation, and so that's it's basically like a performance audit of the fire department. And there were a few areas there that we have not audited before, and we put that on that other report saying perhaps in the next few years we could do an internal audit of that area, and certainly. That information technology risk on page 6 there, that's the one with the highest inherent risk. We reviewed general and application controls in 2009 and 2016, and then Eide Bailey did it as part of the financial audit in 2010. There was an external consultant in February of 2016 that reviewed the IT systems and protocols. They've had some assistance from the Department of Homeland Security looking at those areas that would be vulnerable to terrorists, attacking the city. And so that gets a lot of attention. IT is well aware of the risks, and they are taking positive steps to address those risks on a timely basis. And as I said before, they are also will be instituting training for city employees on phishing scams. And so that's just an area that you constantly have to be on top of, and I think the city is, but there's just a high inherent risk in that area. So I'd be happy to take any questions you have on that.
Any questions for Rich from the committee? I just want to say that this is going to give us and the next auditor a lot of focus areas going forward. Give us a lot of things to look at. I've read it in detail, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. Speaking of phishing schemes, I'm hearing that some employers, I don't know if the Sioux Falls does this yet, are starting to send out emails on their own that are phishing schemes, and if you click on it, then you get some sort of a nastygram or a visit from your supervisor or whatever, to do a...
There's certain, consequences or disciplinary actions or remedial training, perhaps.
Yep, so they're trying to do a little baiting to make sure that the training is working, I guess. So, so very interesting. If there's no questions, I'm going to look for a motion to accept this report and submit it to the mayor and city council.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Tony, seconded by Rose. There's no other comments. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The The next report is item 4D, Audit Report 1804, the Financial Condition Analysis. That will be presented by Rich as well.
Yes, this was on the 2018 audit plan, and I had done some of these analysis. I think I'd done 2 or 3 in the past 10 years when I was the internal audit manager. It's a case of using most of the information that's in the city's comprehensive annual financial report. We call it the CAFR, and pretty much every municipality in the United States has a CAFR if they want to comply with generally accepted accounting principles and auditing standards. They have to have a CAFR. It's in a routine format. There's always an introductory section. Then you have the financial statements, and then you have the statistical section. And since the financials are audited by external auditors, and it makes for a good comparison purposes. You have audit financial statements from one city to another. And then there's something that came up, I think it was a Gatsby statement, I believe 34. I think it came out about 2002 or 2003, where all cities have to present a government-wide certain financial statements. So they're not just by fund, not just the water fund and not just the water reclamation fund, that they have to have a consolidated, basically balance sheet, which makes for analysis much easier, and it makes comparisons much easier. So we came up with, we did some research on what are some things that we can look at in terms of short-term liquidity or long-term financial position or debt, and then do a little bit of calculations using the numbers in the CAFR. And then we, on a few of the benchmarks or ratios, we compared it to 10 benchmark cities, which are listed on the top of page 3 there. Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, Duluth, Fargo, Lincoln, Omaha, Rapid City, Rochester, St. Paul, and Sioux City. And we picked those because that's what we've used in the past. That's what I believe Finance Department has used in the past for when they do some comparison. Cities in our region, they're roughly the size of Sioux Falls. And then we kind of would, I think on 4 of these indicators, I averaged the results of the benchmark cities and then compared it to Sioux Falls. I won't go through every single one of these, but I'll point out page 3 there. I just looked at the short-term liquidity. Just looked at the taking the current assets of the governmental activities, divide that by the current liabilities, and you come up with a ratio. Obviously, you want your assets to be more than your liabilities. You want to have more money in the bank that you owe money to. Be a simple way to put it. So you want that ratio to be more than 1.0. If it's less than 1.0, that means you owe more than you have. And our ratio was very good for our short-term liquidity, averaging around 8 or 10 in 2014. So we have a lot more short-term assets than we do short-term liabilities, and that was in the governmental activity. So we thought that looked good. We have the ability to pay our bills as they come due. So we're not in any danger there. Our liquidity is fine. Page 4, the top 5 taxpayers. In the statistical section of the CAFR, you often see a list of your top 10 property taxpayers. And it's interesting because they'll list the current and then they'll list like from 10 years ago, and a lot of times you can see who's moved up and moved down. The point is you don't want to have a lot of your property tax that is coming from just 1 or 2 or 3 taxpayers, because if they go out of business or they relocate or something like that, they may possibly drop off the property tax rolls, and somebody that you were depending on is no longer paying property taxes. Our top 5 taxpayers combined were all, it was always less than 5% of the total. So we're not excessively dependent on just a few of the top property taxpayers. So that was good. No warning trends there. We talked about net position, the change. Net position is the difference between your assets and your liabilities. It's kind of a quick look at your financial strength there, and we had a very good total net position there at top of page 5. Around anywhere from 1.3 billion to 1.6 billion. That doesn't mean that's money available to spend, because a lot of those are assets that are not liquid. You can't turn those into money necessarily, but that's a good indicator. We'll look at page 6 there, Abby, the intergovernmental ratio. And the reason that that's important, because if your city is relying a lot on state and federal sources for your operating funds, you don't have really much of any control over that. So you're always vulnerable to a certain extent. So if a lot of your operating budget is coming from the federal government or the state of South Dakota. So we calculated that by taking the intergovernmental revenues and divide that by the total revenue for each year, and that's in the CAFR on the citywide statements. We were, we had a couple outliers there in 2013 and 2015. I footnoted why that was. One was for the downtown relocation project. We got a huge lump sum of money there that year. But if you look at 2014, 2016, 2017, those are more normal years. We were about at 8% or so, 7 to 8% of our revenue is from other government sources, and so we thought that was good, that we weren't excessively dependent on other state or federal sources for operating costs. We have certainly, if that money were to dry up, it would cause problems for a while, but it wouldn't sink the city. Look at the debt service expenditures to total revenues on page 7 there. We're just looking at how much of your revenue is tied up, is used for debt service expenditures. And ours was certainly less than 9%. I think in that 5-year period, the highest was 9%, and sometimes it was 7%. So that means we have money available for operating costs. It's not going to debt service, making the debt payments. And we did find that the Ohio State Auditor's Office, there's a footnote on page 7 there, they suggest that cities should maintain a ratio less than 12%. So we're way below that. And then they said any ratio greater than 15% would be a warning sign. If 15% of your revenue was going to debt service, that would be a big warning sign. We're not anywhere close to that. We'll look at outstanding debt per capita on the bottom of 7 and continuing on to page 8. We make a comparison with our benchmark cities. Our debt per capita has been going down each year for 5 years. We're in the moderate category according to Standard & Poor. The benchmark cities were considerably higher than we were. If you look at 2017, the benchmark cities were close to $3,500 debt per capita, per citizen. And we were much lower than that, and we were definitely in the moderate category. Employees per 1,000 residents, personnel costs are our major part of our operating expenses. We've been very steady at about 6.7 to 7.0 city employees per 1,000 residents. Well, the benchmark cities were more at about 8.0. And so that was certainly no warning trend there. And so I'm not going to go through their other ratios unless you want me to talk about them. But the conclusion on page 10 was that we identified no warning trends for the last 5 years, 2013 through 2017. The city's in a good financial position to weather economic downturns, emergency situations, based upon the net position ratio, the rainy day fund that the council is well aware of. Our short-term liquidity is very good, and we outperformed the average of the benchmark cities for all the financial indicators that we looked at in this analysis. So we're doing well. I think it's the city council has adopted a conservative position on that unreserved fund balance. The rainy day fund, they wanted at 25% to finish the year at 25%, and at no time dip below 11% during the year, and I think that's paid off. The challenge, obviously, as we mentioned in the citywide risk, is that sales tax growth has been not at the historical rate. We're hoping with the recent court victory that we'll start seeing more of that revenue from the internet sales, but that remains to be seen how that will all play out. So that would help certainly the city's position. So,
all right, thank you very much, Rich. Great report. Questions from the committee? I just have a few comments and possibly a question. The first thing I want to say is, when I look at this, the city employees and the previous leaders deserve immense credit, and we ought to be incredibly proud of what this city has done to have this much quality of life and to have numbers like this. It's really incredible. And actually see, that we've been growing like we are, and actually the number of city employees per 1,000 has actually dropped a little bit, and that we're well below what the city employees in other jurisdictions are. How they pull it off, I'm not entirely sure some days. So, because it's...
And I know if you ask the city directors, they would like more FTEs.
Yeah, yep, we may be getting to that point, but...
Yes.
The other thing that really strikes you when you look at this is when you look at the debt service that we have, because you see a lot of high-profile projects over the last handful of years, and so it would be easy for somebody to assume that debt is quote-unquote exploding in the city. Yeah. But what this shows is the silent part, which is the offset, which is that we pay off debt very aggressively year after year. So there's always debt that's dropping off the books as we're always taking on new debts. It's not... The arc isn't.
And I don't think most analysts would say it's probably undesirable to set a goal of we don't want to have any debt, because that would probably mean you're not spending any money on infrastructure. So the goal isn't, I don't think most experts would say it should be zero debt, because you're probably deferring expenses to future generations if you did that. Now, on the other hand, Standard & Poor's would look at that for your municipal bond ratings. If you had what they consider excessive debt, they would lower your bond rating. And our bond rating has been upgraded, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years, and it's high. So we have very good credit. So it's a balancing act. And then that's what comes down to the city council has to make that call. So.
Yeah, and I do see staff from finance here, and I hope they can share that with the administration of where we're at and what hard work does, because it really does look really good. The city's on strong financial footing, and that's not by any accident. That's by very wise decisions of previous leaders. So, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to accept this report and submit it to the mayor and city council?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Kylie, seconded by Sale. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The next item is an update on audits currently in progress, and I'm just going to give a very quick update. This was already touched on a little bit. Abby is just wrapping up the Great Plains Zoo audit. I think that's going to be complete more or less this week, in the next few days. The next one is the purchasing card P-card program. They are just going to get that started. I think they're going to do some preliminary work tomorrow, maybe some meetings, and so that is just kicking off. And with that, in the interest of time, we're going to head off to the next one, which is the status of the 2018 audit plan. Just to give you a real quick update, this is essentially a quick review of where we are wrapping up. And just so we can just go through real quick, as stated before, the P-card program is getting started. Payroll employee deductions is moving to next year. You'll see that soon. The bank franchise tax revenue audit was withdrawn because they determined what the issue was with state law. Travel expenditures is being deferred to a future year. Landfill and damage recovery billing processes are moved to the 2019 plan. Great Bear, we just wrapped up and had a report. Great Plains Zoo is getting wrapped up tomorrow. Follow-up of audit recommendations, we had that at the last audit committee meeting, that's done. And then the next two, fraud risk analysis, financial condition analysis, you just heard those. Motor vehicle fee revenue was completed early this year. And preventative maintenance was withdrawn, as we talked about at the last audit committee meeting, as we're moving to new software, and now is not the right time. So, any questions about 2018's plan? Okay. We're going to move on to item 4G, review the 2019 audit plan and recommendation of approval to the City Council. So when we took a look at coming up with a plan, we looked at what you told us at the last audit committee meeting, which was to look at things like payroll and high-risk areas and look at those things based on a risk analysis, and that's exactly what we did. We also included a management contract because we are now doing a rotational audit of the major management contracts. That's something that the city council expressed that they really wanted, was for us to be taking a look at those every 3 years or so, because they handle a lot of money and a lot of assets on our behalf. The plan is also, I would say, modest, simply because we know that we are going to be staffing in the middle of the year, and then it's going to take some time to spin people up. So we didn't want to be get too much on there, because we can always add. So with that, I'll just go through what we have here. The first is payroll employee deductions. That is something that was a high priority for HR, and it's something that we identified as a higher risk area. The next two, landfill licensing, damage recovery billing process. These were identified by our public works as two things that they really would like to see done, and so we're going to do those. The next two are management contracts. Now there's two of them here, but they're very tightly integrated, which is SMG, which manages the events complex, the Orpheum and Sioux Falls Stadium, and then Ovation's food service, which handles all of the food service out there. And actually they work very close hand in hand. In fact, a lot of things that Ovation does goes directly to SMG, and then it funnels through to us. So we're gonna take a look at those, because we haven't done those in a number of years. And then the carryover audit from 2018 will be the P-card program, because that is getting started here, and it's going to run into 2019. And so that is what we came up with. Again, it was based on a risk analysis and what we heard from feedback from the administration of things that they felt were very high priority. And I can tell you that the purchasing division was very interested that we get the purchasing card program taken a look at, because they handle a lot of money through those P cards, and that's been a high priority for them for a couple of years. So we made sure that we wanted to put that one next on the list once we were done with the Great Bear and the zoo audits. And so that's why we're starting that now. So any questions or comments on the proposed plan? If not, I am going to look for a motion to approve the 2019 audit plan and recommend it to the city council.
I would move that we approve the plan and recommend it to the city council.
Second. Moved by Rose, and that is seconded by Tony. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 5, open discussion. Is there any open discussion from the committee? Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is public comment. This is a time for anyone that can talk about anything that we've talked about today. If you'd like to give input, you need to come up to the microphone. You have up to 5 minutes, and if we have multiple speakers, there's a minimum of 15 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to give us public comment today? Seeing none, I want to thank the audit committee for taking 2 hours out of their schedule, particularly those citizen members. It was kind of a marathon, but we got a lot of good stuff done today. So appreciate it very much. Everybody have a good night. I adjourn this meeting.